I'm Travis Frame, and this is Frame by Frame. And today is going to be the sixth episode of my analysis series on the Depression Trilogy. This one's going to be kind of similar to the last, with a lot of talk about uh, interactions and stuff like that. So be warned for spoilers. And with that, I'll get into the video about reactions. So this episode is similar to the last, but it is about the general reactions in a more broad sense. Instead of focusing on what a specific character's reaction means, it will be more about the general idea that the movie is trying to communicate about people in general's reaction to depression. In Antichrist, I see that there are kind of two ways to look at it. The one discussed in the last episode about inner household reactions, as well as the dismissal of depression that can occur. The reason I say this is a secondary interpretation of the film is that perhaps the reason the couple decides to go to the cabin is that society is looking down on them and that no one will offer help. This could be a communication about the social and societal dismissal of depression, since there's really no outside reaction to the feelings of the characters, and the characters themselves are not even named. It is likely to communicate at least a variation of the idea that they are alone in their world and how they feel. Not because it's only them feeling like that, but it's because society has made them feel alone. Nowadays, depression is a topic that many people, at least more people, are respectful of, but few people talk about it. I believe that this is almost taboo in nature, because it can be so hard for so many to seek help, because they feel like they need uh, acceptance, or that it's unacceptable to get help, which is just so wrong. Not wrong of people to think that, but it's wrong of society to do that and to impose that idea on people that are going through depression. Society says it matters, yet seems to avoid it at all costs. Oftentimes, people who are depressed can feel isolated and alone, and it can be really hard for them to reach out. I think Von Trier is criticizing this aspect of society that makes it feel like no one is there to help. He's trying to destigmatize the nature of discussion revolving around depression. He makes a large commentary on society while never actually showing them. And I think that that does a lot to prove his point. Melancholia is slightly different in that it does show quite a wide variety of reactions to the depression felt by the protagonist, particularly Claire's wife, John, who is not just reluctant to try to understand how Justin feels, but also scorns it and criticizes her for it. He is not the only character that does this, though, but he is the main one that does it consistently, and he is present throughout most of the film. He also provides an interesting counterpoint to Claire. In the first part of the movie, both Claire and John criticize Justine and treat her in a very negative manner. Whereas in the second half, Claire becomes more understanding while John remains the same. I think Von Trier is trying to use John to represent how he feels society acts towards depression. They acknowledge it and that it afflicts many people, but are reluctant to be understanding when they actually encounter someone with it. John is not the only character that treats Justine like this, though. Many others scorn her actions or even just flat out ignore them. Her mother is callous and uncaring, and her father is juvenile and oblivious. Even Justine's husband leaves her due to her actions eventually. People are very quick to abandon her because of her condition and are very slow to help her. Her only true allies and supporters in the film are her sister and her nephew. What Von Trier is trying to express is that it is not easy, as someone might think, to deal with depression. You can't always just go to your family and receive immediate support and love. For some people, their family is not a safe haven or a source of comfort. And in some instances, it might actually be a benefactor and in a thing that increases her depression. I think that Von Trier is commenting on the idea that family isn't always the best source of help for someone with depression. It can be, and often is a great source of help for people who are struggling, but not everyone is incredibly close to their family. Some people are scolded and outcast from contact due to their past mistakes or actions, even in instances like Justine, where much of it was out of her control. Von Trier is saying that despite how hard it may be, family members should be open to talking about depression with their loved ones and should not treat them unfairly. Some might think that this is common knowledge, but Von Trier does not. He believes it is very difficult for people to deal with these situations and that families shouldn't shy away from difficult conversations or complicated matters if it means that they're able to help someone they care about, because that's what the family should do. Nymphomaniac presents perhaps the largest number of reactions to the actions and emotions of the protagonist of the three films. Joe interacts with a large amount of people throughout the course of the film, and varying reactions can be seen throughout. I've already talked about the reactions of Seligman, which are primarily positive and supportive, but other than this sole character, the film really feels like Joe against society. The people around Joe look down on her constantly. She's mistreated and abused, and she believes that this is something she deserves, so she rarely makes any attempt to try to improve the way that others treat her. This self hatred sends her on a downward spiral of negative interactions. People often take advantage of her sex addiction and use it for their own pleasure without any care of her well being. This is not always the case, as there do seem to be many people who do actually care about her, but these relationships are merely surface level for Jo, and she often rejects the idea of emotional intimacy in favor of physical. She distrusts society, and this directly correlates with the distrust that many have with her. She often does things without any regard for how others may be affected, not because she truly doesn't care, but because in her eyes, she can't sink any lower than she is. She sees no increase in the general negativity when she hurts others because she views herself as already being the worst. This is shown through different scenes that display her caring nature. It is somewhat cyclical because Jo's self hatred fuels her actions, which result in the way that people treat her, which compounds and builds on her own sense of loneliness. It is unfortunate that instead of attempting to help Jo, society looks down on her with utter disgust. This does not mean that all of Jo's actions are justified, though. She does still make a large amount of morally questionable, as well as outright immoral actions and remarks during the course of the film. However, I think that if someone had made an attempt to help her with the depression earlier on in her life, she would have avoided many of her mistakes and likely wouldn't have had such a pessimistic view of the world. Von Trier is trying to show that society and the way it perceives people can have a massive impact on how people think and behave. In this instance, it has a very negative impact on Jo and how she perceives herself. Other than the few sex addict meetings she attends in the film, Jo never attempts to seek help because society has decided to portray her sex addiction as a vulgar and revolting quality rather than a symptom of her depression. She is not seen as a victim or someone that needs help, and that is the problem that I believe Von Trier is trying to illustrate. The way that people within shared homes and in society react to depression is why stigmatisms and negative connotations arise. Society often perpetuates negativity and avoids conversations about depression, and Von Trier is someone who has never shied away from taboos or traditionally uncomfortable topics. And what he wants is for depression to no longer be one of such topics. He is trying to explain his frustration with how people react to depression through his representation of different characters in these three films, and to encourage the actions that he believes will help those who are struggling. He hates society in a way because they do so little, at least in his opinion, and they perpetuate these negative stereotypes, these downright terrible thoughts. And it can be so horrible to someone who is just trying to feel accepted or trying to feel like they belong when society casts them into a different group. And I think Von Trier's variety of ways in which he portrays society is how he views it and how he thinks that society truly acts. And to an extent, he's right. And he shows this negative element of society, and that there's this lack of help, and that even when there isn't a lack of help, sometimes it can seem like there is. And I think that this is a really important part of the films. That kind of leads into what will be the next episode, which is about nihilism and pessimism. But until the next episode, thank you so much for watching, and I'm looking forward to making the next episode.